We've now proved that no one needs 640 kilobytes of memory, but the ideal quantity of RAM is still a contentious issue. Although RAM is expensive, the moment to upgrade to 32 gigabytes of memory may have finally come. Professional users are already beyond 32 gigabytes of RAM. Before we get into whether the 32 gigabytes RAM level is the new sweet spot for regular users, you should know that for professionals working in high-end content creation or any serious number crunching, 32 gigabytes of RAM is firmly in the rearview mirror. It's not unusual for mobile workstation laptops to ship with 64 gigabytes of RAM, and workstation desktops often have CPUs and motherboards with maximum RAM capacities over a terabyte. For those users, there's no doubt about how much memory they need. It's dictated by the applications and the size of the assets or datasets that need to be processed. There has to be enough RAM to keep those powerful CPUs fed with data, or else all that hardware is idling as it waits for slow SSD storage to catch up. The type of user we're talking about here is the general user. This includes people who do everyday productivity tasks. Those who do mainstream video editing, 3D modeling, and music production. And of course, gamers. What's the case for 32 gigabytes of RAM for those who aren't using a corporate credit card to buy hardware? Kindly leave your answer in the comments section. Gaming requirements are climbing. For gamers, it's quickly becoming clear that 32 gigabytes of RAM should be in the medium-term future. Star Citizen lists 16 gigabytes of RAM as the minimum requirement. Spider-Man Remastered requires 32 gigabytes of RAM for its highest settings using ray tracing. Elden Ring requires 12 gigabytes of RAM at a minimum, and we expect next-generation open-world games to have 16 gigabytes as the starting point rather than the recommended RAM requirement. As more and more games start listing recommended RAM requirements above 16 gigabytes, it's clear that those currently playing with 16 gigabytes of memory will be under pressure to upgrade sooner than later. This leaves 24 gigabytes or 32 gigabytes as the next step, depending on your memory channel configuration. Tab browsing is a memory hog. Not all of us play AAA video games or spend our time designing sports cars and CAD applications, but you almost certainly use your computer for web browsing at least. Tab browsing has made it possible to open dozens or hundreds of web pages as individual tabs. Modern web pages can take up 100 megabytes each, depending on their content, so the memory footprint adds up rapidly. Responsiveness on computers with lower amounts of RAM, web pages you aren't currently using are cached to your hard drive. If that drive is a fast SSD, the impact may not be too drastic, but even then performance can be sluggish as your computer desperately moves data to and from RAM as you browse. If you're the type of person with so many tabs open that you can't even read their titles, splurging on 32 gigabytes of RAM can make a noticeable difference to your system's responsiveness. And lastly, multitasking matters. We've discussed the memory requirements of single applications, but a major strength of modern PCs is multitasking. If you want to run multiple applications simultaneously, you need enough RAM to house it all. If you don't, the computer is forced to shift RAM contents to a drive instead, which is orders of magnitude slower than RAM. While your tab-heavy browser or your video game might not consume 32 gigabytes of RAM by itself, together, they could make short work of it. Modern computers also have oodles of CPU cores. It's becoming normal to have 8 cores. Core counts quickly reach silly levels from the mid-range and beyond. Having many cores means your computer's CPU can easily do several heavy tasks at once, but if it doesn't have enough RAM, the total number of cores is moot. If you want to keep browsing the web, or watching some YouTube while your project renders out in the background, you need cores and RAM to keep things smooth and responsive. Finally, who doesn't need 32 gigabytes of RAM? Is it time for everyone to move to 32 gigabytes of RAM? At the time of this video, the answer is yes for mid to high-end gamers, heavy multitaskers, and anyone looking for the smoothest computing experience possible. We can't recommend 8 gigabytes of RAM for general computing anymore, at least not on Windows systems. Windows 11 needs a sizable chunk of that, not leaving that much for even modestly memory-hungry apps. An 8GB Windows system will be usable, at least if it has an SSD, but the clock is ticking as general productivity apps and web content keeps growing. 16GB of RAM seems to be the most comfortable amount for gamers who don't mind playing at minimum settings in future. Similarly, general users who do things like browsing the web with moderate tab counts, doing office or school tasks, and listening to music or watching video don't have to upgrade above 16GB. Even if you do all of those things at once. We have finally reached the end of this video. Let us know in the comments section if you have any questions or contributions. I am Julie from IQcodec. See you in the next What You Should Know video. Cheese.